so that we begin the process of educating our citizens on why we are required to hold our government accountable when it presents a budget, and to ask whether the goals, objectives, and targets which are set out by the budget is in fact met. And so the intention is to cover a few key areas this afternoon, and I say key because of the limited time we would not obviously be able to have this sort of in-depth presentation that the Minister of Finance would have done last week, Friday. And I want to start with the issue of healthcare, because we are living through a pandemic. All indications are that this pandemic is going to remain, that the virus is continuously mutating and new variants are ensuing. And so we have to ask ourselves, how does our budget prepare Grenada for ensuring that we can in fact continue to survive and eventually overcome the ravages of COVID-19. And regrettably, citizens of Grenada, the budget does not address in any substantive way the challenges posed to our health sector by COVID-19. And you may ask, why do I say so? And I say so because the presentation of the Minister of Finance itself indicates that only $2.2 million more have been allocated to healthcare in the 2022 budget over the 2021 budget. What does that signal? It essentially signals that the government is happy with the state of healthcare in Grenada. And in fact, the only 2 points highlighted in the Minister's presentation in relation to healthcare are: one, the donation of an EVO CT scanner by the Maria Holder Trust to the people of Grenada. Let me repeat that. What the Minister of Finance chose to highlight was the donation of a CT scanner by the Maria Holder Trust to the people of Grenada. And while undoubtedly the National Democratic Congress thanks and welcomes the donation of the CT scanner, one would have expected that the presentation would have focused on the steps and the measures that will be taken via our capacity to treat with and deal with COVID-19. The other highlight made by the Minister of Finance is the purchase by the government of Grenada of a digital X-ray. Those are the only two issues highlighted in the budget when it comes to health. Citizens of Grenada, I want to urge you to become familiar with the National Sustainable Development Plan 2020 to 2035. This is a document that was prepared for and on behalf of the people and government of Grenada. And so the incumbent government had an integral role to play in the development of that plan. And the purpose of that plan was to put us on course to achieve sustained development between the period 2020 and 2035. And that is a plan prepared for and on behalf of the government of Grenada. Yet, save for one minor reference in the entire budget presentation to that plan, the Minister of Finance made no further reference to that plan. But we wish to reference that plan, because budgeting is about planning, it's about forecasting, it is about implementing your goals so that you can in fact achieve the targets that you have set. The National Democratic Congress would have therefore been guided by that plan in relation to its allocation, its budgetary allocation for healthcare. That plan highlights at least 32 action points that are required to put Grenada in a position where it has improved and sustained healthcare. We certainly would have done the following. One, we would have regularized the status of the many nurses who are working on contract. This situation must come to an end, and the government ought to have allocated the necessary budgetary allocation to treat with this matter and to bring it to an immediate end. Our nurses have been on the front line of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. They deserve job security. We need them to bolster our health sector, and we cannot afford the risk of the constant migration of our nurses to foreign lands because they are not being paid adequately. We would have allocated budgetary funds to ensure that there was a permanent increase in the number of ICU beds at our general hospital. Given the challenges posed by COVID-19, given the other challenges that we have in our healthcare, it cannot be right that the government has made no effort and has allocated no funds to increasing the number of ICU beds at our hospital. And the National Democratic Congress would have ensured that funds were allocated to address that. We need to upgrade and expand our community healthcare centers, and special attention must be paid to PT Martinique and Carrick. The health facilities in PT Martinique and Carrick are in a deplorable and terrible state. On my recent trip to PT Martinique and Carrick, for example, in PT Martinique, it was made clear to me that save for a facility to engage in the extraction of teeth, PT Martinique does not even have basic facilities to clean our brothers and sisters' teeth in PT Martinique. So they've become the extraction district of Grenada. That is unacceptable. And if the health of our nation is the wealth of our nation, the government of Grenada ought to have allocated the funds necessary to ensure that the health facilities in PT Martinique and Carrick are at a minimum capable of conducting basic healthcare facilities, basic healthcare services to the people of PT Martinique and Carrick. As part of our plan, 2022 would have marked the start of a 3 to 5 year plan to ensure that we increase the remuneration and benefits paid to all healthcare workers, including our doctors and nurses, to ensure that we retain sufficient of them in Grenada to adequately staff our health sector. Citizens of Grenada, we cannot continue paying our doctors and nurses the low wages and benefits and expect that they will be motivated to deliver the kind of healthcare services that is required. And so the necessary budgetary allocation to address those issues would have certainly commenced in 2022 under an NDC administration. Very little reference has been made to the use of the diaspora and the St. George's University alumni to assist us with improving our healthcare on island. The National Democratic Congress would have used both the diaspora and the SU alumni to assist us in ensuring that on a permanent and ongoing basis, we can ask these two groups to provide specialist healthcare professionals to assist us with delivering on the high quality of healthcare that our citizens deserve. And I say this because many members of the diaspora who are involved in the healthcare sector have indicated time and time again that they are willing and quite prepared to offer their services to us in Grenada for free. And so it's incumbent upon our government to facilitate that on an ongoing and permanent structured way so that our citizens can benefit from those services. The St. George's University is responsible for training a significant portion of the physicians and specialists who now practice in the United States and throughout the world. We need to use that resource and tap into that resource to again ensure because I am quite sure that many of them would be quite happy to return to Grenada on a volunteer basis without seeking remuneration to assist us in developing our healthcare services. Crucial, there are Grenadians in the healthcare sector who have openly signaled a willingness to come back to Grenada and to invest in the healthcare services in Grenada and have been thwarted or prevented from doing so by our government. I cite a perfect example of Dr. Trevor Lane, a well-known, successful oncologist who has indicated that he has purchased lands in True Blue to develop a cancer treatment facility, that he's prepared to fund it himself. And as a citizen of Grenada, all he's asked for is government assistance with concessions and with facilitating a relationship between St. George's University and the General Hospital. Dr. Lane is in Grenada currently. He's purchased the lands are sitting there. And to date, the government has done nothing to assist in the development of that project. We know of the high rates of cancer on island. We know of the high cost to treat cancer. How can a government that says it cares about the citizens of Grenada not be championing such a project, and a project inspired and funded by a Grenadian citizen? So, citizens of Grenada, if the budget is meant to indicate what is a priority to us and what is a priority to the government of Grenada, clearly the healthcare sector is not such a priority. And so for the National Democratic Congress, we intend to, once given the chance, to significantly deploy the resources of the state towards improving and boosting our health care sector. I move on to the area of agriculture, food, nutrition, and security. At page 24 of the Minister's budget presentation, he states, and I quote him, "All things being considered, in excess of 35 million will be invested in the agriculture sector in 2022. But citizens of Grenada, there is no $35 million being invested in the agriculture sector. There is no $35 million actually budgeted or allocated for the agriculture sector. Oftentimes, lawyers are accused of hiding things in fine print. But I invite you to look at the Appendix 1 of the Honourable Minister's speech, which contains the allocation by votes. And you would see that the allocation by votes for agriculture is in fact $19,250,945. It is not $35 million. That 19 million represents a mere 1.4% of the entire budgetary allocation. Let me repeat that. Agriculture, food security, and food nutrition has only been allocated a mere 1.4% of the $1.3 billion budget. What does that tell us when we are in the midst of a global pandemic? A global pandemic that has made the cost of food rise significantly. A global pandemic that has made transportation costs, freight costs triple in some instances. A pandemic that has made logistics, shipping, and the supply chain far more difficult, and that has posed significant disruptions to the export and importation of goods. It means that as a small island, we are very vulnerable to this disruption. And therefore, it is incumbent upon us to ensure that we pay more attention to being able to sustain ourselves by feeding ourselves. How can we do that? If only 1.4% our $1 billion budget is allocated to food security, food nutrition, and agriculture. You can contrast that with the percentage allocation for concrete, drains, roads, buildings. Citizens of Grenada, we cannot eat the road. We cannot eat the concrete drains. We cannot eat the buildings. We run the risk of starvation and destitution if our resources are not put into agriculture, food security, and food nutrition. The National Democratic Congress, therefore, would have allocated significantly more resources to agriculture, to food security, and to food nutrition. We would have acquired the existing agro-processing plants like Windfresh, which is sitting idle, and placed it in the hands of farmers' cooperative to ensure that we can begin the process of manufacturing, processing, storing, preserving our fruit so that we can consume it domestically, so that we can guarantee markets for the production of our fruit, so that we can feed our school children healthy fruits, healthy vegetables grown in Grenada, so that we do not have to rely on importing food from Mexico and Miami at considerably high cost. We would have invested significantly in resuscitating our livestock industry to ensure that we grow more sheep, cattle, goats, rabbits. We would have provided support to the National Poultry Farmers Association to ensure that chicken production within Grenada was expanded so that we can continue to fight the high food import bill that currently exists in Grenada. So if we are serious about emerging stronger from a post-COVID-19 pandemic, we must take our food security, food nutrition, and agriculture seriously. We would have embarked immediately upon a national replanting of our spices involving our farmers, our schools, our communities, and farm labor support. We would have channeled the temporary 2 weeks and 1 month debushing teams into full-time employment support for our farmers to assist with farm preparation, maintenance, and the reaping of crops. I will repeat, we would have transitioned the many citizens who are only given temporary 2 weeks and 1 month work to the bush on the side of the road into full-time employment to support our farm labor program, to support our farmers in the clearing, maintenance, and reaping of our farms, so that true sustainable employment is given to those citizens, so that they do not have to depend occasionally on a 2 week or 1 month job. We would have enhanced the use of technology and education in agriculture. We must place more emphasis on researching new crops that can be grown in Grenada to expand our agricultural output. Therefore, an NDC administration would have invested in and given grants to all of our educational institutions, from St. George's University to the Caribbean Agriculture and Research and Development Institute to the University of the West Indies, to assist us in researching new crops to assist us in developing ways to combat the pests and diseases that plague our agricultural sector. And those issues must be done on an ongoing basis, because the same way the pandemic affects us as human beings, the same way the pests and disease affect our crops on an ongoing basis. And therefore, the necessary budgetary allocation to support that would have been addressed. We need to invest in storage and freezing facilities and chilling facilities to help not just our farmers preserve their produce so that they have a longer shelf life, but to also assist our fishermen in preserving their catch and in processing their catch, so that we get to the stage of having canned fish and preserved fish and minimizing the importation of salt fish from outside of Grenada when we have an abundance of fish within Grenada. The folks in Pitimatlik and Carriacou and in St. Andrews have over several decades developed the art of preserving and salting and our own fish. And therefore we should be taking steps to help develop that industry and to help reduce on the importation of foreign salt fish into Grenada. I move on to the issue of education, youth, and skills training. A large chunk of the budget is subsumed under two ministries: the Ministry of National Security, Youth Empowerment, and the Ministry of Education and Social Development. These two ministries, combined with the Ministry of Infrastructure, Development, Transportation and Works, make up the most significant portion of the budget, excluding our repayment of debts. So one would think that if significant sums are being invested in our youth, that if significant sums are being invested in education, that Grenada would have low rates of youth unemployment, a highly skilled and highly educated youth workforce. But is that the case? Do we have high rates of employment among the youth? Do we have a highly motivated, highly skilled, and highly educated youth labor force? The answer is no. And so these large numbers, which are lumped together deliberately because we do not in fact know where this money is being spent. The few areas that we've been provided a breakdown in, and I will refer to them. The government says it will spend a combined $49.7 million between 2021 and 2022 on construction and renovation work to schools. And while we certainly welcome the renovation, repairs, and construction work to the physical facilities of our schools, one has to beg the question, are we forward-looking enough? For the most part, our students have not been able to physically attend schools over the last 18 months. And yet we are spending close to 50 million on physical buildings that have not housed our students. Significant numbers of our students were required but unable to access online education. Let me repeat that. Significant numbers of our students were required to, but unable to access online education. Therefore, a budget that was forward-looking and a budget that reflected learning the lessons of COVID-19 would have recognized that internet access throughout the length and breadth of Grenada to ensure that our students have access to online learning, to online education, would have been the priority of a government that had learned the lessons of COVID-19. As it stands, the budget does nothing to bridge the gap or to bring more of our students in a position where they can access online education. We can't be serious about empowering our youth if we make no budgetary allocation to address internet access to all of our students in P.T. Martinique, Carriacou, and Grenada.
Stop the spread of germs that can make you and others sick. Cover your nose and mouth with a tissue when you cough or sneeze. If you don't have a tissue, use your elbow. Wash hands often, especially after coughing or sneezing into a tissue.
Feel good facts.
Avoid the most common causes of spreading the flu. Cover your coughs and sneezes with a tissue, dispose of it straight away, and either wash your hands or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer.
That's not how you cross the pedestrian crossing.
Really? One day I just woke up and I saw pedestrian crosswalks on the road. No one really showed me how to use them properly.
Well, this is how it's done. You never cross before doing these things. They might save your life. First, when you get to the crosswalk, you stop. You look left, you look right. If there's a vehicle coming, you put your hand out, making eye contact with the driver, indicating that you want to cross. And only when the vehicle comes to a complete stop, you quickly cross to the other side.
Stop, look, hand out, eye contact. Wait for pedestrian to cross to the other side, then you happily continue on your journey. This message is brought to you by this group of insurance companies, the Traffic Advisory Body, and the Traffic Department.
The government says it has allocated $2.7 million as part of the education response to COVID-19. What does that mean? To a large extent, if our schools have been closed, and if our students are at home, then that is the response there has been to COVID-19. If we are going to reopen our schools in earnest, if we are going to engage in the proper sanitization of our schools, in the safety protocols, in protecting our teachers and our students, There is no way on earth an allocation of $2.7 million for an entire 12 months would be adequate to protect our teachers and to protect our students. The government says it will review the T.A. Marshall Community College and the Education Acts. Well, to what purpose? What is the purpose of the review? Citizens of Grenada, a distinguished and successful Grenadian, and son of our former distinguished Prime Minister, Sir Nicholas Brathwaite, Nicholas Earl Brathwaite Jr., not so many moons ago, offered the government of Grenada the opportunity to completely revamp and enhance the T.A. Marshall Community College and to make it the premier tertiary learning institution, not just in Grenada, but in the OECS. He selflessly offered to fund through his foundation to the tune of $1 million to assist the government, together with McMaster University from Canada, in improving the curriculum at TAMCC and ensuring that the education services delivered at our premier tertiary education institution would be enhanced. All he required of the government of Grenada was to ensure that professional management was put in place and to ensure that there was an open space for learning where students could interact and speak with each other. The government failed to do both, to the point where Mr. Brathwaite was frustrated and had to withdraw his offer of support. If we are serious about education, and if you have a distinguished and successful Grenadian, son of the soil, who is prepared to commit his own expertise, his own time, and his own money towards helping us develop our premier tertiary level education, why would we turn him down? Why would we frustrate him? An NDC administration will immediately begin the process of inviting Mr. Brathwaite back to Grenada to assist with the development of the T.A. Marshall Community College into a first-class tertiary level education where our students can benefit from. If the government saw education as a tool to transform our nation and to transform our economy and to address the high levels of unemployment amongst our youth, the government would have recognized that digitization and the skills associated with digitization must be taught in our schools. No reference is made to that in the budget. An NDC administration will immediately begin the process of instituting the teaching of coding and programming in all our primary schools. We will use the funds from the National Transformation Fund to directly fund the teaching of coding and programming in our schools. Because if the National Transformation Fund is meant to be transformative, it must be used for transformative development. And digitization is one tool that can guarantee our human resource development and the transformation of our education system. We would have allocated significant sums to set up in each district, in each parish in Grenada, a skills training center to deploy and teach the many skills that are so desperately needed by the market in Grenada. from construction to carpentry, masonry, plumbing, refrigeration and air conditioning, mechanical engineering, mechanics, computer technology and information technology, the culinary arts and the hospitality arts, seamanship, boat building and repairs, marine and marina-related skills. Those skills are in high demand. We cannot rely on NULO alone. And by the way, NULO is a non-governmental entity formed and managed by the churches of Grenada, which has only recently started receiving government support. But citizens of Grenada, it is very expensive for young people who do not live within the immediate environs of the two NULO campuses to travel to NULO. If you live in Carriacou or Petit Martinique, it means you have to be stationed in Grenada permanently in order to access the skills training that NULO offers. If you live in St. David, it means you have to travel from St. David to Palmas. The transportation cost alone makes it impossible. Therefore, skills training must be decentralized and must be done on a parish level in order to ensure that sufficient members of our young persons have the opportunity to be trained properly and to become not just employees, but subcontractors, entrepreneurs, and contractors within the marketplace in Grenada. It is incumbent upon a government that wishes to sustain economic activity and sustain better wages for its young persons to transform the Imani program into a program that will allow those who are exposed to that program to transition into the workforce and earn higher wages. The National Democratic Congress, therefore, will give our youth who are part of the Imani program first priority in ensuring that they would benefit from the skills training centers that we would establish in each of the parishes. That way, all of our Imani trainees will be placed in a position where they are guaranteed that on transitioning from the program, they can deploy their skills and training immediately into the workforce. So while we welcome some of the token programs that the government has referenced in the budget, for example, the Youth Garment Factory, and for those of you who've never heard of it, the Youth Garment Factory is a factory that should be located in Pearl, St. Andrews, in which the government has led an initiative for the persons who are trained under that program to create school uniforms for students enrolled in the government uniform assistance program. But our young persons deserve more than that. They deserve to be given an opportunity to create their own employment, to be their own bosses, and to earn sustained and significantly higher wages. So while the Honorable Minister of Finance has indicated that $10 million is allocated for skills training and development amongst the youth, the Honorable Minister has provided absolutely no details as to how this training will occur. Who will conduct this training? When it will be conducted? What will be the criteria for selecting the 100 youth that will be trained? The start and end period of this training? And what are the skills that will be imparted? It begs the question whether this allocation will actually be implemented. We certainly would have taken that $10 million and invested it directly in the parish skills training centers that we intend to establish. And these skills training centers do not require us to construct new brick and mortar, because there are countless community centers throughout our parishes that are either closed, not being used for any serious purposes, and we can certainly begin the process of using them as places of learning and skills enhancement. I move on to the issue of sports, culture, the arts, and the creative economy. Absolutely no attention has been placed in the budget on those issues except for two items. And again, it goes back to the government's love affair with concrete. The government has allocated $5 million to refurbish the cricket stadium for one test match in March of 2022. Let us contrast that. $19 million for agriculture, but $5 million to refurbish the national stadium for a single test match in March of 2022. The other reference to sports culture and the creative economy is a $3 million proposed budgetary allocation to rehabilitate the Simoon Cultural Center. The National Democratic Congress would have used that $5 million for the white elephant, as opposed to spending it on the white elephant that the National Cricket Stadium has become. We would have used that money to invest in the performing arts, to help our young people strengthen the capacity in the music industry, to institutionalize the teaching of mass production, wire bending, steel pan, to teach the history of our culture, the shortening, the Shakespeare Mass, the fancy mass, the Veko, in our schools. These are direct recommendations coming out of the National Sustainable Development Plan 2020 to 2035, the government's own plan. We need to value our young people. We need to value our creative arts, and we need to support them. And so instead of putting money into steel and concrete, we need to put money into our education system that allows the creative ability of our young persons through music, dance, storytelling, book writing, costume creating. And we need to support that by ensuring that there are more studies and more scholarships to assist with intellectual studies so that we can help our young people protect and monetize their creative abilities. The largest part of the government's budget has been on its public sector investment program. As citizens of Grenada, you need to only look at the budget speech and you would see the countless references to this program and this project and this infrastructure work. You live in Grenada, you drive and walk around Grenada, and you see for yourself whether there is any plan, in relation to these public sector investment programs, or whether they are not just more of the same. Starting to construct a road in the middle of nowhere and then leaving it. Starting to build a drain in the middle of nowhere and then leaving it.
For so many years, these waters have had no fish. We kill them off with our careless actions, dumping garbage and toxic industrial waste in oceans and rivers, indiscriminate mooring of yachts, uncontrolled sand mining, deforestation, causing soil erosion and siltation of rivers and seas. We must care for our environment and stop our negative actions. Protected areas are special areas of water and land, which are managed so that their features can be sustained. They are recognized for their natural and cultural importance and their supply of raw materials. Marine protected areas include marine management areas and reserves, places with coral reefs, seagrasses, mangroves, or lagoons. You depend on nature for survival and for the quality of your life. Can nature depend on you?
Wait to see my granddaughter.
EC Polymer Notes, our new money.
Here's how you can detect genuine EC polymer notes. Feel. Polymer notes feel smoother than the material from which paper notes are made. Also, the front of each note has raised bumps at the top left-hand corner. These bumps form shapes that are familiar to you. Look for the clear window at the front and back of each note. This window allows you to see through the notes. If you hold the notes up to the light, you'll see the value of the note in an area of plain colored print. Tilt. A holographic foil is on the $100, $50, and $20. The images move and their colors change when you tilt the notes. Remember, detecting genuine EC polymer notes is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Feel, look, and tilt.
EC Polymer Notes. Cleaner, safer, stronger.
COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by a new coronavirus introduced to humans for the first time. It is spread from person to person, mainly through the droplets produced when an infected person speaks, coughs, or sneezes. These droplets can land in the mouths or noses of people who are nearby. These droplets are too heavy to travel far in the air. They only travel approximately 1 meter and quickly settle on surfaces. This is the reason person-to-person spread is happening mainly between close contacts. The exact time that the virus can survive on surfaces is not yet known. So it is wise to clean surfaces regularly, particularly in the vicinity of people infected with COVID-19. Hands touch many surfaces, which can be contaminated with the virus. You should therefore avoid touching your eyes, nose, or mouth, since contaminated hands can transfer the virus from the surface to yourself. When coughing or sneezing, cover your mouth and nose with the bend of your elbow or use a disposable tissue. If a tissue is used, discard it immediately into a closed bin. The most effective way to prevent the spread of the new coronavirus is to clean your hands frequently with an alcohol-based hand rub or soap and water. This will eliminate the virus if it is on your hands. Stay healthy and prevent the spread of COVID-19.
"5 years today, still no water. Most of the rivers dried up when the forests disappeared, and those that are left are too polluted. This is my future. This is what caused it. Deforestation, indiscriminate wildlife hunting, soil erosion, removal of indigenous plants. We must care for our environment and stop negative actions. Protected areas are special areas of water and land, which are managed so that their features can be sustained. They are recognized for their natural and cultural importance and their supply of raw materials. Forest reserves provide a sanctuary for plants and animals to flourish. The forests are part of the water cycle and provide a source of clean, healthy water. They help conserve a valuable resource for future generations. You depend on nature for the quality of your life. Can nature depend on you?
But we have significant infrastructure failings nonetheless. In the St. George's Northwest constituency, that has existed for some time now. So we have to ask ourselves, if we spend a significant portion of our resources in the non-productive sector, and that is exactly what concrete and steel is, non-productive. If we invest the vast majority of our resources in those areas, how are we going to grow the economy? How are we going to grow our GDP? How are we going to increase production in agriculture, in fishing, in manufacturing, in the digital economy? We are not going to. Because spending money on concrete and steel does not result in the medium or long-term growth of your economy. And it is compounded when you are borrowing to do so. The budget statement clearly says that there is a deficit of close to $100 million. In simple terms, the government intends to spend more than it can earn by at least $100 million. And where is this financing going to come from? It's going to borrow to do so. And our debt to GDP ratio stands at 70%. And if you look at the budgetary allocation, 34% of the entire budget, 34% is being spent to pay debt. And yet, you will present a budget that puts you in a position where you are going to borrow another $100 million. And you say to the people of Grenada, oh, borrowing is sustainable. Citizens of Grenada, borrowing on an individual level, when you cannot repay, is not sustainable. Those of us who go to a bank for a loan knows that the bank will not give you the loan if you cannot pay back the loan. And you know if you cannot pay back the loan, it spells disaster for you. You will lose your house. You will lose your car. It is the same thing on a national level. If our government continuously spends more than it receives and borrows to finance the difference, we will continuously be in a position where the vast majority of our resources are spent trying to repay unsustainable debt. So if we wish to transform our economy, if we are going to borrow at all, the borrowing must be for the productive sectors, the sectors that will grow the economy. Because when the economy grows, the government gets additional revenues and it allows you to sustain and repay and pay down your debt. It is as simple as that. And that takes me, citizens of Grenada, to the structural adjustment program, which was imposed by this government on the citizens of Grenada. We were told we needed to make a shared sacrifice to pay down debt that was incurred by this very administration, debt that was incurred to do the same thing, build concrete, not build the productive sector. And the shared sacrifice we made, we paid the higher taxes. We accepted the reduction in government services. We accepted the poor quality government services. The public servants, the government implemented a policy of attrition, not replacing public workers. And this allowed the government to pay down the debt it had borrowed while putting us in a poor position. It also allowed the government to save revenue. What has the government now decided to do with those savings? When the teachers said, pay us our contractually agreed 4%, what was the approach? The approach was that we will not pay you because we can't afford it. And it led to a war between the government and the teachers. It led to our hard-working teachers having to take to the streets to demonstrate, to beat drums, to not attend to classes, to our teachers being demonized. But miraculously, 2 years into a pandemic, 2 years into reduction in government revenues, the government is now in a position to say, I can pay you a Christmas bonus to public servants of 1 month or half a month. Let us put in context how much money that is. Based on the Minister of Finance's own statement, the government's monthly wage bill, including pensions, is $30 million. If we exclude the pensions, which is roughly around 6.5 million, you're left with roughly 23.5 million in a wage bill. So the government now has resources 2 years into a pandemic to pay an extra $23 million in the space of 30 days. The government has also offered to pay an additional half-month salary But we ask this question: is the government going to really make true on these promises to our frontline workers, or public servants, or health workers, and our police officers? Or is this not part of some gimmick? And I say this, citizens of Grenada, because the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance has put out a circular number 21 of 2021. And it says this, regarding one above, and the one above is quoting what the Minister of Finance said in Parliament. The Royal Grenada Police Force and the Ministry of Health are kindly asked to submit by Friday, 5th December, which is this Friday, the categories of all workers, all such workers who would qualify for the additional 1 month's pay. A list of all workers in the identified categories who do not qualify for the additional 1 month's pay because they did not physically perform and continue to perform, and by virtue of their duties were not exposed to the risk of COVID-19, should also be submitted. So I ask yourself this question: who is determining whether a police officer was exposed to the risk of COVID-19 or not? Who is determining whether a doctor or a nurse was exposed to the risk of COVID-19 or not? It goes on. All other qualifying workers not covered in one above, who consistently perform duties from the onset of the pandemic to date, will receive an additional half month's pay in December. And they're aiming to make this payment by the 16th of December. But there's an additional catch. It says regarding two above, the criteria for qualifying for an additional half month's pay is currently being developed. Let me repeat. The criteria for qualifying for an additional half month's pay is currently being developed, and payments to all qualifying workers will be made during the first quarter of 2022. Well, I thought Santa normally comes before Christmas, not in the first quarter of the following year. But again, the criteria is being currently developed. Who is developing that criteria? Who decides whether a public servant gets the half pay or not? So, citizens of Grenada, after all of us have made the shared sacrifice under the Structural Adjustment Program, and have gone through the shared sacrifices of coping with lockdowns, job losses, restrictions on our freedom of movement, the closure of businesses, if the budget was meant to position us to come out stronger as a result of COVID-19, it is not doing so. Our police officers, who have been on the front line as a result of the institution of the state of emergency, have had to work 24 hours a day around the clock. At one time, the police were effectively running the state of P.T. Martin, Carrick, and Grenada. If a farmer needed to go farm, he needed to get a police pass. If a fisherman needed to fish, he needed to get a police pass. And how do we reward the police officers? Merely by a token 1 month's pay? Merely by a token 1 month's pay, when the government is fully aware that the pay scale for police officers have not been adjusted since 1995. Let me repeat that. The pay scale for police officers has not been adjusted since 1995. And for those of us who follow political history, 1995 is a significant year for obvious reasons. So if we were truly interested in rewarding our police officers for the tireless work that they've had to endure as a result of COVID-19, we will engage in activities that would bring long-term meaningful benefits to them. The pay scale would be addressed and would have been settled so that police officers are brought in line with other public servants. So the budget isn't meant to address serious underlying structural issues and fix the government. It isn't meant to address the many public servants who are on contract work and who are crying out for the government, its own government, not to treat them in a discriminatory manner. So the National Democratic Congress will, when it has the opportunity to address those issues, ensure that contract work within the public service is brought to an end. It will ensure that the pension dispute with public servants is resolved. We cannot continue a situation where our employees or working class citizens, after they have toiled in vineyard, are plunged into poverty upon retirement. I want to address one final issue, which is that of the gas price. The proposed cap on gas at $15 per gallon still leaves Grenada, because the $15, traditionally the price of fuel in Petit Martinique and Carriacou is even higher. And the minister has made no reference to what the cap will be for Petit Martinique and Carriacou. And so we are still awaiting that announcement, because I'm sure our fellow citizens in Petit Martinique and Carriacou are also awaiting that announcement. And while we are on that, citizens of Grenada, you should be aware that there is no gas station in Petit Martinique. There is no gas station in Petit Martinique. So our citizens of Petit Martinique have the added burden of having to go to Carriacou every time to get gasoline. And on a jetty that is not fit for human occupation and use. A jetty that is inherently dangerous. No budgetary allocation has been made to address the public jetty in Petit Martinique. So the $15 cap will still leave us paying more for gas than St. Lucia, which is at $13.95 per gallon, Barbados, which is at $14.93 per gallon, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is at $14.17 per gallon, St. Kitts, which is at $14.03 per gallon, and Dominica, which is at $13.93 per gallon. Citizens of Grenada, our government collects $5.50 in tax revenue on every gallon of gasoline sold. If it was truly concerned about the high cost of living, and given how fundamental petrol is to that process, it would have said not only would we cap the price, but we reduce the tax on fuel consumption. So, the National Democratic Congress views the budget as the same old, same old. It makes no effort to address the structural challenges that we face in our economy. It makes no effort to invest more in the productive sectors. It makes no effort to invest more in actual education and training of our youth. It makes no effort to invest in the digitization of our economy. And to a large extent, all it does is pay debt, incur more debt to fund non-productive public sector infrastructure works. A National Democratic Congress will reverse that structural imbalance and will invest more in our productive sectors, will encourage the private sector to invest more in our productive sectors. We will invest more in our youth, in our education, in our healthcare, so that we can truly grow our economy, grow our GDP, so that there is less reliance on us borrowing to sustain our livelihoods, so that we are less vulnerable to the shocks associated with an economy that imports almost all of its food, and so that we can begin the process of transforming our economy to one that is sustainable, to one that is productive, and to one that leads to a high standard of living amongst our citizens. I will conclude my presentation, and I would be happy to have any questions that you may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now invite the media. If there are any questions, please, you may use this microphone to pose the question.
The Prime Minister will issue some scattered remarks towards you in a kind of hidden way during this budget debate. Do you have any concerns, or would you like to address it?
Stop the spread of germs that can make you and others sick. Cover your nose and mouth with a tissue when you cough or sneeze. If you don't have a tissue, use your elbow. Wash hands often, especially after coughing or sneezing into a tissue.
Feel good facts.
Avoid the most common causes of spreading the flu. Cover your coughs and sneezes with a tissue, dispose of it straight away, and either wash your hands or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer.
To be honest, I didn't hear the comments. I was in the PT Martin at Carrington between Monday and Wednesday, meeting with the folks of PT Martin at Carrington to ascertain what the challenges they are facing during the COVID-19 pandemic. So most of my time yesterday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday was actually spent there. So I didn't have the opportunity to actually hear the comments of the Prime Minister. I'm aware based on what people said to me that he made some comments. I'm not in a position to respond to them, so I didn't hear them.
You have hinted to your connections with representing WRB, and that $65 million passed through your hands, and that you should not collect those fees and give back to people.
Well, $65 million is not passed through my hands. For the purpose of educating the population. The government of Greenland bought the shares of WRB, or bought back as a result of the arbitration award made in favor of WRB. The shares of Greenland are public shares, which means they are traded on the Eastern Caribbean Securities Stock Exchange. In order to transfer shares in a publicly traded company such as Greenland, you need to use a stockbroker. And in the context of that transaction, there were two stockbrokers or security exchange companies that were used. One the Greater Public Bank and another banking institution. Those are the entities through which the stock or share trade was made. The funds from the government of Greater was paid through the agent or the stockbroker, escrow agent, institution, which is the institution bank, and they took the transfer the sums to the government.
So no funds or fees were ever transferred to my account because I'm not a stockbroker. I'm not a licensed securities dealer or exchange, and I would not have been in a position to engage in such transaction. I would have provided legal services to WRB in relation to the transaction, and subsequent to the close of the transaction, I would have been paying whatever legal fees were due to me by my client. So no funds were transferred through my firm's account in relation to this transaction.
Okay. We have highlighted during our presentation the lack of real interest in agriculture, mostly the agricultural sector. Yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, the Honorable Peter David, Minister of Agriculture, was funded to a list of programs to boost the agricultural sector, improve or develop production among the different areas. As you said, we have many kinds, I don't know if you have been able to see those. Do you believe it is not? But the question is, do you believe what you have highlighted, you have highlighted all the different areas such as research and development at Mary Home and law for livestock and a number of other programs. Do you believe it is enough in 2022?
Well, any programs that attend to or has as its goal the improvement in our agriculture sector is welcome. But clearly, based on budgetary allocation, it is not enough. The reality is, let's just take livestock for example. Let's just take livestock, and I'll include poultry under that. We are importing millions and millions of dollars worth of meat, and most of it is frozen. So whether it's beef, chicken, even fish we importing, shellfish, right? So if we are going to, and that money means we are taking the money we own here and sending it overseas. So if we are going to make a serious dent in just livestock alone, you have to plan that and you have to set the goals and targets by which you want to be able to achieve that. So when you have a budget that doesn't say, for example, by 2025, we want to be in a position where whether it's in absolute numbers or percentage, we want to have, for example, 10,000 more cattle on island, or 10,000 more goat or sheep or rabbit or whatever. You will not achieve it because you have no goal. So just merely saying you want to increase livestock is a bland statement that is not focused, and you therefore don't actually plan to achieve it. So for us to start turning agriculture around seriously, we as a nation, the government in conjunction with the stakeholders, have to be in a position where we can clearly quantify the goals that we are trying to achieve in the agricultural sector. So if, for example, we want to be in a position where we actually consume a certain percentage more of chicken or rabbit, we have to set that goal. The population has to be aware of it. And then we have to take the measures that will ensure that we are doing so. So if we take cattle, for example, you have to be able to identify the areas in which we can actually develop for cattle. The government, for example, has large estates. Was there any conversation by the government in saying we've identified one or two large estates, we will turn those estates, for example, into cattle or into mixed use between cattle and plants with the view that at the end of 2022 we have 500 herds of cattle? No. That kind of conversation doesn't take place because it is not taking place. And that is the challenge we have when we just talk about agriculture, and not just agriculture, any form of development in this blanket setting. If we do not have actual data, if we do not have actual targets, then we are spinning top in money, and we will not make the kind of sustained improvement or progress that we want, whether it's agriculture or any other sector. So I'm saying, I have no doubt that the Honorable Minister is probably trying his best, but we need to do more than simply try our best. We need to actually be in a position where we set plans, we set targets, and then we work backwards from there to achieve them. But given the very small portion of the budget that is allocated to agriculture, it is one thing to talk and say we intend to do ABC. It's another thing to effect it. And to effect it, you'd probably expect that resources will be dedicated towards it. And we're not seeing that. If you go to places like Carriacou, for instance, I was told it hadn't rained in 2.5 months prior to me being in Carriacou and Pitima. In a situation like that, how are you dealing with livestock? How are you addressing the water issue? How are you dealing with agriculture? How are you addressing the water issue? Right? So I'll give a simple example. One of the things that the farmers in Carriacou raise is having some kind of carve out so that farmers in Carriacou and Pitima can have access to underground water. Because right now, NOASA has a monopoly nationwide on underground water. And they are saying, we're in an island where it barely rains. And your statutory body that is responsible for water is not in a position to give us water as farmers. So give us an exception that will allow us on our own lands to be able to catch water underground so that we can sustain ourselves. And those are the kinds of things we need to talk about to ensure that we actually empower farmers and put them in a position where they can actually do the things they need to do to in fact grow and sustain agriculture, and not only sustain but put us in a position where we can export. I mean, Carriacou, Petit Martinique could be the hub of the Grenadines if we have plans that will create the development that is required in those areas.
I cannot personally understand. You have spoken at the end of your presentation the elimination of contract work. Government is still maintaining that the fiscal space does not allow receiving bonuses, receiving. We know what you see. But basically, the debt that we have also highlighted to how would the NDC government handle that in terms of balancing the debt to GDP ratio with the elimination of contract work.
Right. So, work to a large extent gives meaning to life. And so work can't just be measured by your basic salary. The people who work make up the majority of the society. If you want your economy to grow, it means their income have to consistently grow as well. And there has to be predictability to that. There has to be sustainability. It is therefore in our nation's interest to not put our workers in a position where they have unsustained employment or unpredictable employment or employment that doesn't allow them to grow economically. So if you're on contract work, it means a bank will never give you a loan to build a house because you could be out the street any day. They will not give you a loan to further your education. They will not give you a loan to buy a vehicle. They will not give you a loan if you wanted to do some side hustle. So it is in the nation's collective interest to not put workers in that position, because when you put workers in that position, you are effectively shooting your own selves in your foot, because the economy overall will never be in a position to grow. So even if it means biting the bullet initially to regularize the status of our contract workers, that must be done. But I'm saying also, we have a National Transformation Fund. We should be in a position to quantify what it will cost to regularize the status of contract workers in Grenada. And once we quantify that, then the next job is to say, how do we fund it? The National Transformation Fund could be one such area of doing so. Or in a given fiscal period, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 years, we can say to these contract workers, we can't pay you all of the benefits immediately, but the plan is we will gradually pay you this over a 3 or 5 year period. The point being, they will become more productive because they have job security. Let's remember that. And we need productive public workers. Because if we are going to turn the economy around, the ease of doing business and the type of services we get from the public service needs to improve dramatically. And one way of addressing that is ensuring that our public workers feel secure in their jobs. If you have two systems running, those who are disadvantaged will not be motivated to work. So as much as we have debt, this very government has demonstrated that with high taxes and with self-imposed structural adjustment programs that we can pay down our debt. If you pay down your debt, you don't pay down your debt just to go and borrow more money again and put yourself right back in the same position. If you do borrow, you should be borrowing to fix structural issues like what I've talked about with the contract workers, or to invest in sectors of the economy that will grow the economy. And if your GDP is growing, and if there's fairness and equity in the economy, then it means your workers will benefit from that. They will get better wages and salaries. They will buy more. They will be able to save more. They will be able to invest more. And the basket, the cake, the pie will become wider. And that's how societies grow. So you can't have a situation where you're impoverishing your own workers. If you pay your workers less, then it means they have less money to spend. And if they have less money to spend, it means they have less money to buy anything else, and the other businesses themselves will contract and not grow. So it's in our collective interest to always want to pay workers more. It has to be sustainable, I accept that. But I'm saying you cannot, as a state which can raise taxes, make the excuse that you don't have the fiscal space for sustained improvement in wages and terms and conditions of work, and at the same time give one-off payments of 1/12 your entire national salary. Because what does a one-off payment do to a worker? Nothing. You just have an extra 13-month salary. But you can't. You think if you go to the bank and say to them, I have an extra 13-month salary, that they will give you the loan? No. Because your basic salary has remained the same. And so the reality is, but there's also something called dignity. If as a government, you are creating this level of instability in the workforce and in the labor market, you are setting the standard. You are telling the private sector as well, it is okay to put everybody on contract. And if everybody works a contract and we create that level of insecurity within the job market, then our economy will become unstable, people will migrate, and instead of growing, we will retire. So fixing that issue, and for the life of me, I don't understand why a government would want to encourage such a behavior. Right? And I say this because there is a reference in the budget report to saying that some consultation has been done on the issue of contract work. And the implementation is likely to come sometime in 2022. But it seems to me that is, as usual, talk, and no serious effort is being made to get it. Let me just get the page in which there's a reference to that. Reference to projects. Right. That contract workers have been complaining about their unfair treatment, and that it has commissioned a study, and that it hopes to implement the study in 2022. But again, no further details is provided on that, and whether this is in fact a legitimate promise that the government intends to address remains to be seen. But I will say this, if it does intend to address it, it will be welcome. But I've seen no real solid indication that it is doing so, because if it was doing so, it should have been able to quantify what the cost of regularizing the status is. It should have said what that cost is, and it should have said what the budgetary allocation will be towards addressing that. And we have not seen that. So the absence of a budgetary allocation to actually address that says to me that this is probably nothing more than an empty promise.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Misha Hall here, Unity Speaker. Vaccination. Vaccination is a very topical issue right now. I mean, persons who are reluctant to get vaccinated. That's really the issue. Experts have told us that the national recovery percentage rate of persons who contract the coronavirus is 99.97%, which means that there is only a 0.03% chance of someone not recovering. Right? With vaccination being pushed as our best shot in the fight against COVID, and especially with persons expressing concerns, persons are actually afraid to take the vaccine more than the threat posed by the virus itself. Right now, we're experiencing a situation where even amidst the threat of the COVID-19 virus, we have low positivity rates.
You may need to come a little closer to the mic, yes.
Okay, I'm good? Right. So, in a situation where we have low positivity rates, we're experiencing low hospitalization and even deaths. Given the impact that the vaccine mandate is having on livelihoods, will an NDC government consider making alternative measures to cater for persons, and to respect the wish of persons who may not want to take the vaccine for whatever reason, and also to protect livelihoods of persons who may not have contracted the virus and don't pose a threat.
The NDC government will engage in a national consultation with the citizens of Grenada to arrive at a majority decision or consensus position as it relates to the impact of vaccination or non-vaccination, particularly as it relates to the employment status of persons. I'm on record as indicating that I support vaccination. The National Democratic Congress is on record as saying that it supports vaccination. Supporting vaccination is one thing. Saying to someone else that you can't vote if you're not vaccinated is another thing. because there are obvious consequences to that. The immediate one being that you are pushing people into poverty. The question is such a policy sustainable in a small island of Grenada? And there are a number of factors we have to take into consideration. One, we are an open society that depends heavily on tourism. We are an open society that depends heavily on external trade and external travel. We are a society that imports significant amounts of our food. And so we have to find the right balance in act that protects lives and protects livelihood. And it's not therefore a personal opinion matter only, or a personal choice matter only. It is a matter that requires national debate, national discussion, and then a consensus. And once that consensus is reached, then implementation ought to take place. I think we all know that the virus is constantly mutating. Governments all over the world have been challenged with responding to it. Citizens all over the world as well have been challenged with responding to it. So it's our collective responsibility to educate one another, to respect the wishes and views of one another, and to engage in debate and discussion that is healthy, rather than divisive, rather than demonizing one group of people over the other, or rather than promotes more rights for one group over the other. We have to be able to walk back some of this and be engaged in healthy debate, because it may be this COVID-19 pandemic, but the reality is that there are more to come. And therefore we need to ensure that we set a precedent that is sustainable and that protects all of us as much as we can, respect the rights of all of us. But at the end of the day, there are certain core values that operate in a society like Grenada: democracy, freedom. We have to protect these fundamental rights. And so it's important for us to ensure that whatever action we take that is supported by the majority, that the rights of the minority are also protected. So it's not an easy issue to address, but certainly the absence of meaningful consultation, education, and engagement will be reversed on an NDC administration, so that we, as much as possible, get the true view of the population as to how they wish government to address the issues that have arisen as a result of COVID-19.
During the budget debates, the opportunity Mr. Savannah's comment would have expressed concerns as it relates to the I think surrounding the reduced electricity rates that the government will have announced, right? He expressed concern that businesses may be tempted to pass, businesses who are not included in this whole, relief package, may be tempted to pass on the charge to the goods and services that they offer. Can the NDC share their position on this issue, if any? And I notice we have any comments on the panel.
Yes. Well, I'll comment first and then I'll ask Mr. Andrews to indicate whether he wishes to comment. So there are three aspects of what the government has announced in relation to the cost of electricity. The government has announced that it will eliminate VAT, which is a tax, as well as the environmental levy, which is a second tax on the cost of electricity. So, in strict terms, the eliminating of VAT and the eliminating of the environmental levy doesn't really affect the cost of electricity. It is simply tax revenue that the government has chosen to give up. All right? The environmental levy is a pass-through tax. It's a tax that was imposed by the government to fund the Grenada Solid Waste Management Authority. So it's not just RENEC, but things like FLOW and other entities pay environmental levy. All the government has said is, if you are consuming less than 500 kilowatts of electricity, then that tax will be taken away and you don't have to pay it. And VAT on electricity will also be taken away and you don't have to pay it. So that's in relation to tax. That really doesn't affect the cost of electricity per se. The third aspect of it is that the government has indicated that it will reduce by 25% the non-fuel component of electricity charges, because the fuel component is rising. Now, that remains to be seen, because in strict terms, the non-fuel component means the entire cost of RENEC's operations, excluding the cost of diesel. If RENEC can sustain a 25% reduction if it can sustain a 25% reduction in the non-fuel cost of its operations, that would be a miraculous achievement. So on that issue, I would simply say that remains to be seen. It may be possible because as the main shareholder of the company, the government may decide it doesn't want the company to be profitable and it may want it to operate at a loss so that it can subsidize the cost of electricity. But I will also say this, the government is not the only shareholder of Renwick. There are other small shareholders, and I don't know that a small shareholder of a company will agree to the majority shareholder running the company in such a way that the company makes a loss and the small shareholder is deprived of the benefit of earning a profit on his investment. So those are my comments. As to, perhaps ask Mr. Andrews to address as to whether or not the specific concern of the leader of the opposition as to whether other companies who do not benefit from this this concession may somehow increase their prices or costs to the persons.
Yes, thank you for the question. Now, this is likely that I think the government may want to consider passing on any additional costs to the consumer in an effort to protect itself. The truth is that there is really actually nothing stopping an individual business from doing so. But under our conditions, the advice is that to the extent that we have a Chamber of Commerce in our country, it may be better, it may be useful if the Chamber as an institution meet and take a decision so as to guide businesses what approach they can take under such conditions. Yeah. Now, as regards the reduction in the non-fuel charge, that in itself is a very difficult decision, really. And I'll tell you why I say that. The truth is that the revenue of Grenwick, based on my understanding, comes precisely from that area. The fuel charge is passed on to the consumer because they have no effect over it. Good? So the operations of Grenwick depends on the non-fuel charge. And the revenue that the company earns really is based on that non-fuel charge, which I think is $0.45 on every kilowatts of energy used. Now, what that means is that if you're going to bring that down by 25%, you are in fact reducing the amount of revenue that the company would earn. And there is a view that revenue could even fall down by as much as 1.8 million on a monthly basis. Yeah? Now, if that's the case, then it means that the profitability of the company can be called into question. But it's more than that. The government now owns over 70% of the shares in Grenwick. And if the revenue falls and the profitability falls, it also means that the share price of the company falls. Yeah? And given the amount the government might have paid, I think it's around $14 per share to regain the company. You're really putting the company assets and the company value at a risk by implementing such a measure. Now, in my humble view, one of the things that the government may want to consider instead is the sale of shares. You can sell the shares to the population. You own 70%. You can consider selling half. Yeah, and you price it in a way that even the ordinary man would be able to buy. Yeah, so even the ordinary worker, he can buy a certain amount of shares because it is thus priced. Good. What that means is that the shareholder now, the ordinary man, now becomes a shareholder. He has a sense of pride because he owns part of a national asset. But he now also becomes a dividend earner at the end of the year based on the profit that the company makes. So perhaps instead of lowering the non-fuel charge at that very high level, I must admit 25% reduction is indeed pretty high. Yeah, one go. You can consider, if you want to lower, but at least if you want to sell somebody shares, keep it there at a certain price so that first you can gain some capital to reinvest back into the company, because you will lose that when your revenue falls. But also the benefits you would have gotten from a reduction, you will now get it back in terms of dividend payments on a yearly basis for many, many years. You see the point I'm making? So that's a
reference to projects. Right. That contract workers have been complaining about the unfair treatment, and that it has commissioned a study, and that it hopes to implement the study in 2022. But again, no further details is provided on that, and whether this is in fact a legitimate promise that the government intends to address remains to be seen. But I will say this: if it does intend to address it, it will be welcome. But I've seen no real solid indication that it is doing so, because if it was doing so, it should have been able to quantify what the cost of regularizing the status is. It should have said what that cost is, and it should have said what the budgetary allocation will be towards addressing that. And we have not seen that. So the absence of a budgetary allocation to actually address that says to me that this is probably nothing more than an empty promise.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Misha Hall here, vaccination. Vaccination is a very topical issue right now. I mean, persons are reluctant to get vaccinated. That's really the issue. Experts have told us that the national recovery percentage rate of persons who contract the coronavirus is 99.97%, which means that there is only a 0.03% chance of someone not recovering. Right? With vaccination being pushed as our best shot in the fight against COVID, and especially with persons expressing concerns, persons are actually afraid to take the vaccine more than the check posed by the virus itself. Right now, we're experiencing a situation where even amidst the threat of the COVID-19 virus, we have low positivity rates.
You may need to come a little closer to the mic, yes.
Okay, I'm good? Right. So, in a situation where we have low positivity rates, we're experiencing low hospitalization and even deaths. Given the impact that the vaccine mandate is having on livelihoods, will an NDC government consider maybe alternative measures to cater for persons, to respect the wish of persons who may not want to take the vaccine for whatever reason, and also to protect livelihoods of persons who may not have contracted the virus and don't pose a threat.
The NDC government will engage in a national consultation with the citizens of Grenada to arrive at a majority decision or consensus position as it relates to the impact of vaccination or non-vaccination, particularly as it relates to the employment status of persons. I'm on record as indicating that I support vaccination. The National Democratic Congress is on record as saying that it supports vaccination. Supporting vaccination is one thing. Saying to someone else that you can't work if you're not vaccinated is another thing. Because there are obvious consequences to that. The immediate one being that you are pushing people into poverty. The question is such a policy sustainable in a small island of Grenada? And there are a number of factors we have to take into consideration. One, we are an open society that depends heavily on tourism. We are an open society that depends heavily on external trade and external travel. We are a society that imports significant amounts of our food. And so we have to find the right balance in act that protects lives and protects livelihood. And it's not therefore a personal opinion matter only, or a personal choice matter only. It is a matter that requires national debate, national discussion, and then a consensus. And once that consensus is reached, then implementation ought to take place. I think we all know that the virus is constantly mutating. Governments all over the world have been challenged with responding to it. Citizens all over the world as well have been challenged with responding to it. So it's our collective responsibility to educate one another, to respect the wishes and views of one another, and to engage in debate and discussion that is healthy, rather than divisive, rather than demonizing one group of people over the other, or rather than promotes more rights for one group over the other. We have to be able to walk back some of this and be engaged in healthy debate, because it may be this COVID-19 pandemic, but the reality is that there are more to come. And therefore we need to ensure that we set a precedent that is sustainable and that protects all of us as much as we can, respect the rights of all of us. But at the end of the day, there are certain core values that operate in a society like Grenada: democracy, freedom. We have to protect these fundamental rights. And so it's important for us to ensure that whatever action we take that is supported by the majority, that the rights of the minority are also protected. So it's not an easy issue to address, but certainly the absence of meaningful consultation, education, and engagement will be reversed on an NDC administration, so that we, as much as possible, get the true view of the population as to how they wish government to address the issues that have arisen as a result of COVID-19.
During the budget debates, the opportunity, Mr. Savannah's comments would have expressed concerns as it relates to I think surrounding the reduced electricity rates that the government will have announced, right? He expressed concern that businesses may be tempted to pass, businesses who are not included in this whole, relief package, may be tempted to pass on the charge to the goods and services that they offer. Can the NDC share their position on this issue, if any, and with this, we have any comments on the panel?
Yes. Well, I'll comment first, and then I'll ask Mr. Andrews to indicate whether he wishes to comment. So there are three aspects of what the government has announced in relation to the cost of electricity. The government has announced that it will eliminate VAT, which is a tax, as well as the environmental levy, which is a second tax on the cost of electricity. So, in strict terms, the eliminating of VAT and the eliminating of the environmental levy doesn't really affect the cost of electricity. It is simply tax revenue that the government has chosen to give up. Right? The environmental levy is a pass-through tax. It's a tax that was imposed by the government to fund the Grenada Solid Waste Management Authority. So it's not just RENEC, but things like Flow and other entities pay environmental levy. All the government has said is, if you are consuming less than 500 kilowatts of electricity, then that tax will be taken away and you don't have to pay it. And VAT on electricity will also be taken away and you don't have to pay it. So that's in relation to tax. That really doesn't affect the cost of electricity per se. The third aspect of it is that the government has indicated that it will reduce by 25% the non-fuel component of electricity charges, because the fuel component is rising. Now, that remains to be seen, because in strict terms, the non-fuel component means the entire cost of RENEC's operations, excluding the cost of diesel. if Grenlec can sustain a 25% reduction, if it can sustain a 25% reduction in the non-fuel cost of its operations, that would be a miraculous achievement. So on that issue, I will simply say that remains to be seen. It may be possible because as the main shareholder of the company, the government may decide it doesn't want the company to be profitable and it may want it to operate at a loss so that it can subsidize the cost of electricity. But I will also say this, the government is not the only shareholder of Grenlec. There are other small shareholders, and I don't know that a small shareholder of a company will agree to the majority shareholder running the company in such a way that the company makes a loss and the small shareholder is deprived of the benefit of earning a profit on his investment. So those are my comments. As to perhaps ask Mr. Andrews to address as to whether or not the specific concern of the leader of the opposition as to whether other companies who do not benefit from this this concession may somehow increase their prices or costs to the persons.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Now, it is likely that I think the government may want to consider passing on any additional costs to the consumer in an effort to protect itself. The truth is that there is really actually nothing stopping an individual business from doing so. But under our conditions, the advice is that to the extent that we have a Chamber of Commerce in our country, it may be better, it may be useful if the Chamber as an institution meet and take a decision so as to guide businesses what approach they can take under such conditions. Yeah. Now, as regards the reduction in the non-fuel charge, that in itself is a very difficult decision, really. And I'll tell you why I say that. The truth is that the revenue of Grenlec, based on my understanding, comes precisely from that area. The fuel charge is passed on to the consumer because they have no effect over it. Good. So the operations of Grenlec depends on the non-fuel charge. And the revenue that the company earns really is based on that non-fuel charge, which I think is $0.45 on every kilowatts of energy used. Now, what that means is that if you're going to bring that down by 25%, you are in fact reducing the amount of revenue that the company would earn. And there is a view that revenue could even fall down by as much as 1.8 million on a monthly basis. Yeah? Now, if that's the case, then it means that the profitability of the company can be called into question. But it's more than that. The government now owns over 70% of the shares in Grenlec. And if the revenue falls and the profitability falls, it also means that the share price of the company falls. Yeah? And given the amount the government might have paid, I think it's around $14 per share to regain the company. You're really putting the company assets and the company value at a risk by implementing such a measure. Now, in my humble view, one of the things that the government may want to consider instead is the sale of shares. You can sell the shares to the population. You own 70%. You can consider selling half. Yeah, and you price it in a way that even the ordinary man would be able to buy. Yeah, so even the ordinary worker, he can buy a certain amount of shares because it is thus priced. Good. What that means is that the shareholder now, the ordinary man, now becomes a shareholder. He has a sense of pride because he owns part of a national asset. But he now also becomes a dividend earner at the end of the year based on the profit that the company makes. So perhaps instead of lowering the non-fuel charge at that very high level, I must admit 25% reduction is indeed pretty high. Yeah, one go. You can consider, if you want to lower, but at least if you want to sell somebody shares, keep it there at a certain price so that first you can gain some capital to reinvest back into the company, because you will lose that when your revenue falls. But also the benefits you would have gotten from a reduction, you will now get it back in terms of dividend payments on a yearly basis for many, many years. You see the point I'm making? So that's a...
The preceding was a paid political announcement. The views expressed are of the client and not the Grenada